And we're pleased to welcome to the Telil studios this week for a conversation that ties into our Pride Month coverage, the head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network and the founder of the network and a board member for Cape Breton Pride. She is Veronica Merrifield. Veronica, thank you for joining us here on Telil 24/7.
Thank you for asking me to come.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I wanted to begin by asking for a bit of the history of the Cape Breton Transgender Network. You founded it. How did it all start, and what need did you see that you really wanted to fill with this particular organization?
Okay, so I came to Cape Breton in 2016 and got involved in supporting parents, children, adults who were transitioning or part of the transgender network. But I didn't have a lot of visibility, and people were finding it hard to find somebody to reach out to get support. So I ended up creating the network to both create that visibility so that I could be found, so they could be helped, and to create a better supporting community.
So what has the reaction been like? Have you found that people have been coming to you and to your group?
Yeah, I run a support group for adults. I have a number of speaking engagements that come out of it to help and educate. And I have people coming to ask for help. They find me some way, and then start asking the questions that they need answered.
All right, that's terrific. Speaking of education, we want to take a moment to share with our viewers that you are wearing the colors of the transgender flag.
I am indeed wearing the colors of the transgender flag.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize, I mean, we have the pride flag up as our backdrop behind us right now, but there are as many as 6 different flags representing different corners of the LGBTQI community. Could there be even more?
There's even more. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of flags that represent the various presentations of gender variation and sexuality variation. Mm-hmm. So today I'm wearing the transgender one.
Okay. Now, you mentioned as well in terms of education, and I wanted to pick up on this because you are also a board member for Cape Breton Pride, and your role is in education. Can you give us a bit of a sense on what you do and what you and your colleagues do right now? Not only are you the head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network, you also serve on the board for Cape Breton Pride, and your particular role on the board is education. So can you tell us a little bit about what you and your colleagues are doing right at this moment, and what kind of initiatives and programs you have to better educate Cape Bretoners about LGBTQIA issues?
So right now we're in the throes of organising the Pride Week for August, flag raising on August the 5th. Parade on August the 6th. In my particular role, I'm also organising the Living Library event, where we have a number of speakers who will come to speak for a short time about aspects of their life, and it'll be a varied set of conversations. And I'm also organising the vigil on the Thursday, which I believe is incredibly important to remember those who've lost their lives for all sorts of reasons. The suicide rates are pretty high. There's rates of homicide around the world. And this needs to be remembered, that the LGBTQI plus community has quite a lot of losses. So those are my particular ones for now. But generally, I think it's fair to say that all of the board do what they can for education. Education is so important, but to coordinate those education sessions is kind of what I do on the board.
Now, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned you've been in Cape Breton for 5 years. You're living in Marion Bridge now. Can you give me a sense of what you feel the lay of the land is right now for acceptance and inclusion of the LGBTQIA community? Because many of us that are here have been here for years. We've seen that it's been extremely difficult, especially in rural areas. What is your sense of how things are now for the community and for general acceptance of the community?
That's a very interesting question, is the response. It's very variable. There are certain aspects where acceptance is not a problem. There's a lot of lovely people, and we just get on with our lives. But also, in some of the work that I've been doing, I've become a target to the point of getting death threats. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in Cape Breton. And to be honest, there's a lot of work that needs to be done nationally, which is why I get involved nationally too. But then on the world stage, you know, we're doing really well compared to some countries, but we're doing not so well against some other countries. So there's still a lot of mileage. Yeah.
Does it hearten you to see communities like the Strait area starting to hold public pride events? Before this interview, I had spoken to you about Taylor Linloff, who is the pride facilitator in Port Hawkesbury for the 3rd year in a row. They have worked with you, and you've had conversations with them. Does it bring you some joy and some hope to know that pride events are not only happening outside of the Sydney area, but that they're happening for 3 years running now in places like Port Hawkesbury?
Yeah, so shout out to Taylor for the work they're doing. It's incredible. I am really pleased to see more areas doing pride events. It's heartening to see that, you know, the Richmond area is doing this. It was heartening to see Eskasoni doing it, and I'm currently helping the folks at Antigonish do stuff too. These communities are really rallying behind this. I was at the high school in Antigonish a week ago to speak to the entire high school. So, and at their flag raising. So this is a big thing, and this kind of spread is good. These kind of pride celebrations are not just restricted to large cities. The population is spread through rural communities, and it's good to celebrate.
Now, one of the reasons I did want to have you join me here in the Tell Ill Studios is because of your own personal story. You've said you have a willingness to share that with me, and you do that as part of your role as an educator. Obviously, this goes back many years, and it has a great impact on your heart and your outlook to this day.
Yeah.
Can you tell us your own personal story of the evolution into Veronica, basically?
I'm very happy to share that story. Good. So, despite my looks, I'm 55. I was born in the East End of London in the UK. Grew up in Southampton. My parents are, I think it's probably best to say, fairly cult religious types. I was raised male. At 4 years old, I realised I wasn't, but I couldn't deal with that as a 4-year-old. But etched in my memory is that moment. I can remember that hot summer day. I can remember the sound of the birds in the sky, the kids in the street that were playing, the smell of the cut grass. It's still, that visual is very much there, that moment where I knew that things weren't right and who I was. It took me until I was 8 years old to pluck up enough courage to ask for help, but I was denied, and I was given a fairly stringent religious lecture. And after that, I felt on my own for a lot of things, which has its consequences in later life with mental health. It wasn't until post-university and moving out to being on my own that I sought my own help, and went down the transgender path, because that's what that's where it was going. This was, even then in the 90s, it wasn't particularly well supported in the UK. I had to go use private help where I could. I had to do a lot of things for myself. And it was during that journey that it was discovered I was intersexed. So I could equally have worn an intersex flag today, and that's yellow and purple circle. I've since discovered in more recent years that a lot of people who thought they were transgender were intersexed. I'm part of an intersex community, and there's a lot of us who went through very similar paths. So that's where I get to now. I have a history with suicide survival, and it's the suicide and prevention part of what I do that really drives me. I want to save lives, and it's really hard to know how many you save, but it's really easy to see how many do take.
We appreciate you being so honest about your own story, and you talking about suicide and about how many experience these feelings. And Taylor Linloff, the Port Hawkesbury Pride facilitator, they have really been promoting a slogan they've come up with: Pride saves lives. And on the surface, it's a slogan, but it really goes much deeper than that. So can you talk for just a moment about the idea that the importance of being free within someone's own identity is critical, not only to their living day to day, but in some cases to their living at all?
To their living at all, absolutely. The statistics probably speak the loudest. Most transgender people, like 90%, talk about having some sort of suicide history, and around 60% have actually tried to take their own lives, which would indicate that there's a large number out there who succeeded in taking their lives. Societal expectations of heteronormativity push people to think that they need to conform, and trying to fit yourself into that conformation doesn't work, and that is enough to push people to take their life. That's why visibility is so important. People need to know that there's people like me out here who have been there, done it, got the dress, and are willing to speak up, are willing to be seen, are willing to be there, are willing to campaign, are willing to be activists, are willing to advocate, and that's why I do what I do.
Now, you mentioned visibility, and one of the things that has struck me in recent months is how we are seeing more visibility among the trans community. And I mean, we even look to the recent provincial election. Lisa Lachance, the NDP MLA for Halifax Citadel Sable Island, the first trans MLA in Nova Scotia. And a lot of people talk about Matea Roach on Jeopardy, but of course we know she was preceded just a couple of months earlier by Amy Schneider, who had that great run. So do you get that sense that we're seeing it more and more, that there is that visibility for the transgender and non-binary community, even just here in Nova Scotia?
I do, and I speak with kind of like a near 30-year history here. And I have a good friend who transitioned 30 years before me, and we've talked about this, how the visibility has raised in all of those years, how it's got so much better, and the advances are getting better because of that accelerative effect of visibility. But that visibility means that a lot of people are able to be themselves. And some of those people have spent, best part of their adult life hiding because they don't think that they could come out, let alone seeing the children who are transitioning now. And it's remarkable to see that kind of change in sort of primary and middle school education, and to see supported kids that are able to come out and be themselves, and the difference that makes, as opposed to those who have to wait until now and they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s before they can make that change. It's a huge deal. It really is.
Recent census figures as well indicating that not only are we seeing a record high number of Canadians identifying as transgender and non-binary, but Nova Scotia actually has the highest provincial percentage of those identifying as such in the entire country. What did you think when you saw those figures?
So Nova Scotia, BC and the Yukon scored the most highly in that. The percentages were higher than I've seen in other statistics, international statistics, but I think visibility is starting to play a part in that. It's not that any of us didn't exist beforehand, it's that we weren't able to be ourselves. I think the political history of gender-affirming care in these provinces is probably why those numbers are higher. I have no idea whether there's any migration to Nova Scotia by those who are looking for care. I would hope that perhaps if that is the case, then at least they found somewhere where that care is better than it is in some other provinces. But I think there's a general openness here that maybe there hasn't been in some other provinces. But I think that goes to political history here.
Yeah. Speaking of political history, I can't have a conversation with you without speaking of the battle that you have waged against conversion therapy, not just locally, but nationally. And I know that became a political football just a couple of years ago and seemed to go down along party lines at the federal level. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in this regard, and also why you were so forceful in making sure that conversion therapy doesn't happen in Canada.
Okay, so I'll start with the last part of that question. My own history involves being pushed through conversion therapy, and it does some very destructive effects to a person's self-validation. It takes away and erases a lot of their identity in what is deemed to be a way to cure. It doesn't work. It often results in suicides. There have been a number of attempts for conversion therapy banning in Canada. I got involved in when C6 was being bandied around, mainly because the wording that I saw in it wasn't litigable. Using words like against somebody's will is not something you can prove or disprove in court. Therefore, it would be a piece of litigation law that doesn't have teeth to be enforced, and that's why I got involved. And I was fairly public in the paper, and I managed to get an audience with the team at the Attorney General's office. We talked about this and why it was an issue, but at that point it was running through the House at committee stage, running up to a summer recess, and then what turned out to be the election. So that fell off the order book. But there was a commitment that they would bring it back, and I had been advocating for a full ban. And if they couldn't do a full ban, then the wording needed to be changed so it could be litigable. So they came back and they had a full ban in place as that piece of legislation, C4, which I still believe is probably the fastest piece of legislation to go from tabling to passing with royal assent. But there's a lot of us who are involved in that. Whilst I was advocating it for it here, there are a lot of people around the country advocating for it. And a lot of us spoke out and did what we needed to do to push politicians to do this. I was very thankful that it did go through, because I really didn't want to have to appear at committee stage to testify, but I was willing to do it. And I know a lot of others did testify. I'm now on the board of a national conversion therapy survivors non-profit organisation as a communication director. There's a lot of work still to be done, both for the survivors who it's a difficult thing to recover from. It's a difficult thing for professionals to help those recovering from. Not enough research or understanding in it. But I'm also still fearful that in some ways conversion therapy can happen behind closed doors. So it's something I've got in my mind to be careful of and what we might need to do in the future.
So we're not done having this conversation, unfortunately.
I don't think we're done having this conversation. I think a lot of people think it is done, but I know there are still organisations out there, as you said, along party lines, that would be pushing to try and reverse the ban. So it indicates that there's still issues out there. And, you know, there's other countries are following suit. France and New Zealand followed Canada fairly quickly in getting their bans in place. But back in England, where a ban was put forward at the Parliament, they singled out not providing that ban for those that were transgender, so they could still be subjected to conversion therapy. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done worldwide. And we weren't the first to put the ban through, but we were early. I hope to see it done in the rest of the world.
We are winding down this conversation, and I want to ask you, in your present day, what would you say to that 4-year-old back in England? Phrases like "it gets better" start to become cliche, but what would you say about where you are now and how far you have come and the pain you've gone through, but to know that it does get better to a degree?
So thank you for acknowledging the pain. Yes, there's been a lot of it. I have issues with that it gets better, because that implies that it's okay that it's not better now, and it should be better now. I think if my 4-year-old self were in primary education now, I would have a better chance. I still don't think my 4-year-old self would necessarily understand what was going on. I don't know what I would tell my 4-year-old self, but I don't think my 4-year-old self would have come forward to talk because she didn't know what to do. And that's where education in a broader sense comes in, so that parents are able to spot some of the telltales. And this is a kind of a sub-project that I'm currently working on, is talking to parents who have transgender children to talk about what they saw beforehand with the knowledge of what they know now, to see if we can put together better guides to help parents spot this. Most transgender people, children included, don't know what to say. They don't know how to say it. It's complicated, particularly as a 4-year-old.
We have covered a lot of ground over the course of the last few minutes, as I thought we might, and I greatly appreciate that. Veronica, would you like to add anything else just before we wrap up here?
I'm here, I'm visible, I'm here to help. People can find me through the Cape Breton Transgender Network. The website is cbtn.ca. Or you can find me on Facebook. I have a fairly public profile. I'm open and available for anybody that needs help or anybody that wants some education, and I'm open to come to organisations to help do that.
Well, we appreciate you giving us a few moments to talk about many different aspects of this conversation, and it is a multifaceted conversation, and doing so with such honesty and dignity. Veronica Merrifield, thank you for joining me on Tel Il 24/7 today.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Veronica Merrifield is the founder of the Cape Breton Transgender Network and serves as the education coordinator on the board of Cape Breton Pride. Stay tuned for more of Tel Il 24/7 in just a moment.